Kristen Shilton, our Maple Leaf reporter, is here. Kristen, welcome. How does that even happen?
Oh, well, I've been in the ring since about mid-August, so, I'm used to it by now, but it does feel like hockey's right around the corner point.
You sent out some audio today from two, key components on what could happen to that Leaf blue line. You talked with Travis Dermott and Connor Carrick. What did they say?
Well, it's been a storyline all off-season and really going all the way back to last season of how was this defense going to be better or going to be as good as the Leafs offensive group. And Dermott and Carrick are two parts of that equation in that Dermott, he was there for half the season, started last January, played right through the NHL playoffs with the Leafs, then went on and won a Calder Cup with the Toronto Marlies. And while he has sort of been on the rise, Connor Carrick has really struggled to find his place within this team over the last year. Roman Polak took his spot about midway through last year because of his penalty killing abilities, and Carrick sort of fell to the wayside. And that's something that he's really eager to put behind him. He wants to be a big part of this team. He wants to be a contributor. And, we talk about, players, well, they make money either way. They're getting paid to sit in the press box, but no player, especially not a young player like Connor Carrick, who's 24, he wants to be out there. He wants to be of consequence to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's really his message earlier today is that he's put in a lot of work this summer on the physical and the mental aspects of his game. We know he's a hard worker. We know that he has the tools. It's just been a matter of putting them together and making him into a player that the Leafs want on the blue line every single night. So Dermott is really he's really on the cusp of being a bigger contributor for this team, and Carrick has done everything he can to get back into that top six for next year.
Kristen, when you talk about pride with these players, I mean, does it go further than that? And when there's always speculation and the conversations about, well, the Leafs need a top six forward, what's the general reaction to that question when it is posed to defensemen?
Well, that's, they're going to get it throughout training camp. They're going to get it throughout, the very early season once we see how this team comes together. When you bring up questions like that with players, especially when it's been like this for a couple of years, I mean, they are defensive in a way because, you're basically saying, well, nobody thinks that you guys are good enough to do this on your own, and there hasn't been any reinforcements brought in, so how are you going to manage, to be better than you've been? And there is pride and there is ego, of course, but it's also that these players put in so much time and effort into their craft, and they're out there every day and they're working, and they don't get to choose what management does, but the players we see every day at management, we don't. So we don't question them, obviously, nearly as much as we do the players. But when I spoke to Morgan Riley last week about the same topic, he said that the biggest thing is you just don't want to let the management and the coaches down in this situation. That's a lot of the same answers you get from guys, whether it's offensively or defensively, when you ask, hey, doesn't this team need another player? Don't they need some big free agent signing to come in order to make, this a championship caliber group? But, players, the management team has made it clear they believe in these players. So they want to prove that management team right. And that's the general sense that I've gotten so far, is that this group, I knew management always liked this group more than maybe people on the outside did, but it's clear that the guys in the room really like playing with each other as well, and that makes a big difference for them on a day-to-day basis when they have consistency, and they really do like being around their teammates.
I would suspect we're going to have numerous conversations about the evolution of that blue line with all that young talent. And I guess probably the biggest question that could come out of it is that there's so many options there moving forward. I just wonder where the line in the sand is that, if it doesn't work out or the struggle continues, if it holds the team back, what exactly would push them into making the trade everybody wants them to make?
Well, the first part of that, or I suppose the most important part of it, is there would have to be a trade that's available to them that brings in a player of the caliber that, the general consensus seems to be that the Leafs need, that they need a top 2 or a top 4 defenseman to come in. But those types of trades, they are out there, but what are you willing to give up in that situation? So that's the first part of the question. Is I don't think that it's not as if Kyle Dubas hasn't looked into things. It's not as if he hasn't talked to other GMs. He's talked to every GM in the league, I'm sure. But what are you willing to give up in order to make a trade like that? And defensemen especially, we don't see a ton of trades for top defensemen because they're hard to come by. And when teams have them, they grow them from within. I mean, you look at how even the Leafs have gone about things, is that they're trying to grow their defenders, whether it's Travis Dermott or Morgan Riley, now Connor Carrick. They did trade for him, but they're trying to improve from within. So it would really have to be just a stark the defense would have to play a starkly different type of game from what management sees them as being capable of. And I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't know if the defense will be as suspect as seems to be, as I know some fans think that it might be. It'll be solid. It'll be consistent, ideally. And if it can be good or it can be great, then that's kind of a bonus. But the Leafs are putting their eggs in that offensive basket in a lot of ways. They put big money into their offense. They put big money into their goalie. They haven't put really big money into their defense. So in order to make a trade where you might have to give up a really young prospect or a player you really like, plus high draft picks to bring in a top four defenseman, I mean, on the open market, it's just, and you don't know what kind of chemistry he's going to have. You don't know if he'll be a good fit in the organization. It would have to be a pretty big drop-off by this defensive group and over a pretty long period of time, to the point that management didn't think it was sustainable to keep them together before they made any kind of big trade, I would think.
Kristen, training camp opens in 10 days in Niagara Falls, and the question, I guess, will be, will William Nylander be there? Are you surprised that here we are in the 11th hour and there's still no deal? And do you anticipate this week to be a busy one for Kyle Dubas and Nylander's agent?
Well, it's one of those where you don't know how it's going until the deal is done. And that's just because the way that the Maple Leafs operate and the way that Nylander's camp has been operating is to just stay quiet about it and to keep everything in-house. And that's, the agent side, they don't want to get burned by leaking something out that when they know the Leafs don't want it out there. So everything's been pretty quiet, but I'm not surprised that we're at this point. I mean, it's still early in the sense that guys are just now starting to trickle in on a daily basis, like the regular guys. We just saw Jake Gardiner, Austin Matthews, those guys just rolling in today. So I'm not surprised at all that a deal hasn't gotten done. I wouldn't say that there's a cause for concern at this point, because if it's taken this long, then there's probably a pretty clear idea on both sides what needs to happen to get a deal done. It's just that, hey, you have the time, so why not use it right up until the deadline, I suppose, when training camp begins. Why not use it if you have it? Because then perhaps you have a better chance of working out a deal that works best for both sides, instead of just saying, okay, fine, we'll give him what he wants, or we'll cave on this particular clause, and then then you're frustrated that you didn't just wait and use the time that you had as well as you could. Lou Lamoriello always liked to say, when you have time, you use it. And Kyle Dubas seems to be following that same protocol. So once we get into next week, if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, if he's not at the golf tournament next week on Monday, then you might start to think, okay, let's, maybe there is something that's really holding it up and it won't get done. But players like Nazem Kadri, just as the most recent example, they've been here. They've been at this point, coming up to training camp, no new contract, and then, right on the last day, right when you think, oh, he's not going to be there the next day, they get something done. So I don't think there's any cause for concern yet, but I also wouldn't have expected to come back today and see William Nylander out there with a contract in hand.
What do you think they're looking at? I mean, there's got to be a comparable in the marketplace that they could sort of come in either above or under.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more that just reading between the lines and looking at what Dubas has said over the last couple of months about this, it comes down to what the big picture of his contract is, and that if this is going to be a long-term deal, a 5, 6, 7-year long deal, there has to be an understanding on both sides of where this team is going and where Nylander is going to fit into it long-term, and how they see, things sort of playing out. And that includes other contracts that they will have to get done at some point down the line. And that means you have to be pragmatic with every contract, especially your forward contracts, the money you're going to devote to those. You have to be pragmatic in the big picture in the long term. So if you're William Nylander and you want to be a part of a team that's going to have a good chance to win for X number of years, maybe you're not pushing the envelope and going for the very, very top dollar that you could possibly push for, even in a comparable contract, if there was one that they're looking at elsewhere in the league. Sometimes you do have to make a concession here or there in order to get something done that will allow you to fit into the big picture of the team going forward. So I would think that that's the biggest part of it, is that they just have to get to a point where they both understand what the bigger picture of the Maple Leafs is going to be for the next few years, and then make sure that Nylander accepts what his role is going to be in it, so that there's no surprises down the road.
Kristen, the the Maple Leafs. Let me get into season here. The Maple Leafs are going to be at the rookie showcase at the Bell Place in Laval. Who are some players that you think we can keep our eye on this weekend who could maybe make some noise in the main camp later this month?
Well, the marquee name, just like last year for the Leafs, is going to be Timothy Liljegren. He had, I thought, a really good second half to his season with the Marlies last year. After he went through some struggles at the World Juniors, he came back, and that team really missed him while he was gone. And I think that almost boosted his confidence in a way, was to know that he was missed and that the team did struggle a bit without him. And so he came back in, and I felt like he really took hold of a role there that was very important, especially as they went on that Calder Cup run. And I spoke with him when the season ended, and he just said, his defensive game is what he's been working on, but he really felt he made strides in that department. And so now it'll be intriguing to see how his defensive game looks when he's playing against some of his peers in that tournament. So he's obviously going to be the number one guy. And then Rasmus Sandin, who was drafted in the first round in Dallas back in June, he's another player that I'll watch, first of all, to see how he interacts with some of these other young players. That's always an important thing at these rookie tournaments, is you see the bonds forming right away, whether it's on the ice or off the ice. You see if there's some chemistry that starts to build there a little. And we don't know for sure if Sandin ends up playing with the Marlies or he ends up going overseas, wherever it is, going back to Rögle in Sweden. Wherever that ends up being for him, it's an important showcase just to see where his game is at and then how he's able to gel with players who are a little older than him, who have a little more experience than him. Does he look out of place, or does he look like somebody who could play with men now? Or is that still maybe another season away for him? So those are the two biggest names, I would say, but there's always somebody who surprises you at these tournaments. There's always somebody who ends up making some noise. So there's a big chunk of the Leafs prospects that I would think any of them could jump off the page, just with how many of them have been around over the summer and how many of them have been working out in Toronto. It's a very motivated group of prospects, it seems, this year. So I'm sure that we'll have a few players to talk about when it's all over.
Kristen, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.